When there's a challenge, that organization is going to weather the challenge and be better. When an opportunity comes, that organization is going to embrace the challenge, even before the leader may even know about the movement to embrace that opportunity that's out there and be even more successful going forward. So my response is, how can you not invest in your people as a leader?
Welcome to Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. Today's guest is Lieutenant General Omar Jones, a retired 3-star United States Army officer and advisory board member at Apogee Global. Over a 33-year career, he commanded at every level, from a 100-soldier company deployed to Bosnia to a global organization of 60,000 soldiers and civilians supporting Army installations around the world. He also led the military task force that supported the 2021 presidential inauguration. He joins us to share the people-first leadership framework he built and pressure-tested at every level of scale.
Omar Jones, welcome.
MK, thank you. It is good to see you again, and I've been looking forward to this, and I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, great to see you as well. You know, one of the things that I'm pretty proud of in terms of the trajectory of Apogee Global is that we've associated ourselves with some folks with very, very deep experience in a variety of lanes. You came to our attention through a mutual contact, actually someone who's a leader here with Apogee now, Mike Green. Your career is outstanding, right? It's the career that we all, certainly for those of us in service, probably aspired to at some point, but you actually pulled it off. So congratulations on a diligent, well-served career in the United States Army, retired Lieutenant General of the United States Army. Just fantastic. And I appreciate you making time for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, MK.
So let's jump right into it.
Sure.
The topic of leadership, which is it's both a passion topic of mine, but it's also something that I think after my experiences in both public sector and in the private sector, I think it's oftentimes misunderstood where the focus of leadership should be for the individual practitioner and leader. I think that folks rarely understand that it's a discipline that's worthy of study, like that it doesn't come natural to nearly anyone, to be quite honest, and that you got to put time and effort into it. I'm interested in having a conversation, or at least starting the conversation with you around how you feel that you've changed as a leader over the many decades that you had the opportunity to lead. I know that, you know, if your journey is anything similar to my own, having started at a service academy as well, I had concepts and ideas of what I thought leadership was, and they certainly do a great job giving you the foundational pieces at West Point and Annapolis. How did you change over the course of your career from what you were taught to what you learned works in practical terms?
MK, again, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. And this is a topic I just always enjoy talking about. To your point that it is a discipline that I think requires continuous study and continuous growth. And I've absolutely been a student of leadership and a recipient of some incredible leaders around me that I have learned from throughout my career. But when I look back, I mean, even to high school days, you know, as a team captain and those kind of things, through the academy and through probably my first 6 or 7 years in the Army, I thought the teams that I was part of was doing well. I thought that I was effective as a leader, but I always thought that I just feeling that I was missing something. You know, I would see other teams that were out there that were more closely knit, that maybe they were, people were bringing more creativity and more initiative to the team. And so I really started reflecting as an Army captain. So at about the 6-7 year mark, what could I do differently as a leader? Had a phenomenal boss, a phenomenal lieutenant colonel who had played basketball for Mike Krzyzewski at West Point, the famous Duke coach, and went on from coaching at West Point to coaching at Duke. And it really helped me think about leadership from a very different perspective. And in retrospect, what I had been doing from high school, West Point, Army lieutenant, Army captain, was very transactional. And I think a lot of the Army doctrine is transactional. And if you go to any of our major business schools, it's transactional. You know, I've gone back and I've looked at Harvard Business School, Wharton at UPenn. And in many ways, it's the leader does something to get an output from the teammate. I mean, even the Army's language of the leader provides purpose, motivation, and direction. Well, you do that to get output. And that's not a bad thing. It works, but in some ways you won't get to an optimized team, a team where people are really going to bring their best to the organization So this leader was then Lieutenant Colonel Bob Brown. He ended up retiring as a four-star general. And what he brought was a sports team approach to leadership. And it really started with putting people first, about investing in people and building the team no matter what the mission was. And I didn't understand that maybe when I was a junior captain. I started to understand it, as a more senior captain, but I embraced that approach and I used it throughout my career of investing in people and building the team. And whether it was a infantry formation of 900 soldiers going to Afghanistan, whether it was leading Army public affairs, whether it was leading the team that supported the inauguration in 2021 for the president, or supporting all the Army installations around the world with 60,000 civilians and soldiers, it was invest in people. Invest in people and build the team. Then they're going to bring their creativity. They're going to bring their initiative, and the team is going to be so much more effective going forward. And I'm happy to talk about the pillars of that philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about Maslow and how it all ties in. But that was a real transition point for me. It was a transactional leadership approach to a people first leadership approach that, one, I enjoyed. I found it very rewarding, but I also found the results both in the people and the teams and the mission to be very, very effective.
Candidly speaking, was there anything like a single situation that stood out to you that created this pivot moment for you? Or did it happen to you over the course of time as you were just sort of searching for a higher level of execution?
I think it was probably both. I remember distinctly, and I commanded an Army company, which was about 100 soldiers, and we went to Bosnia Herzegovina for about 6 months. And I remember how proud I was of what the team did and accomplished the mission. And I remember thinking about what can I do so we could get the team to be even more effective. And those were the conversations I was having with my leadership at the time. So it was a moment in time between commanding that company, and then I went to a larger company of just shy of 400 people. And the first time I tried a very people-centric, team-oriented approach, I enjoyed it more. The organization was more effective. People seemed to embrace the organization more. So that was the moment in time, but it didn't just happen in one job. It was one job after another, continuing to learn, continuing to see the benefit of investing in people. So while the pivot was a moment in time, the evolution was actually throughout the course of my career.
So what you just described actually brings up an interesting challenge to, I think, people-centered leadership. And of course, at Apogee, this is totally the approach that we take and something that we absolutely agree upon. People should be the focus. As you described your transformation, you went from an organization of one particular size to a much larger organization. Talk about the challenge as a leader, especially as the central leader of this 400-person entity. How do you maintain a people-centered approach when your responsibilities grow exponentially in terms of the number of people that you're dealing with at scale?
Well, I'll tell you, and we'll go from 400 to, again, my last job was 60,000. And the challenge of how do you drive, change, lead a culture in an organization that is that big? And it's probably a good point to talk the pillars of those the approach I take to people-centric leadership. The first part is connected leadership. The leader has got to be authentic. So what you're seeing on the screen right now, this is who I am, day in and day out, for better or worse. This is my wife and my son see, and my daughters-in-law, and I think that matters. And I think the larger an organization gets, the more important it is that you are authentic, because you can't turn it on and off. People know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And people want to know that they may only get a chance to personally see their leader once in a month, in 6 months, in a year, a very, very large organization. And they want to know that what they hear about you and what they hear from you is truly who you are. I think you've got to listen more than you talk. And that is so hard in a large organization, to be able to take a deep breath and say, I want to listen. I want to listen to what my people are saying. I want to listen to hear what's on their mind. And something I found is earning people's loyalty. A lot of times in the military, as well as private organizations, we assume people are going to be loyal just because they join. I say you flip that. I say you start with, ask, why did they join? Why are they here? What are their goals? Not your goals for them, but what are their goals, and how can you help them accomplish those goals earn their loyalty by being loyal to them. But when you get that kind of connected leadership, you get that second pillar, which is a culture of belonging. I mean, you and I know that belonging is an emotional connection. It's a lot more than just show up to work and get a paycheck. When people say, I belong to an organization, they care about the organization, they feel cared about. And when you can get that type of emotional connection, and we'll go a little bit of philosophy here or psychology, then you get beyond that step one, step two in the hierarchy of needs. And now you're getting to self-actualization because people are bringing their best selves to the team because they equate their success, their own achievement of their goals with the organization doing well, and they care about the organization. But the last pillar, I think, is sometimes forgotten because when in some people-centric organizations, because if you just focus on just giving people what they want, then sometimes you can get an organization that may not be as effective as possible. And I call that last pillar a climate of predictability. And it starts with putting people in positions where they can be successful, letting them know that here's what I expect of you in your job, and holding them accountable for that. When they meet it, thanking them. When they exceed that, praising them in public. When they have a major event that they're expected to prepare for, letting them give some time for that, and you helping them accomplish that major event, not telling them it's 9 a.m, you've got a major event in 4 or 5 hours, you better not mess up. People don't feel cared about when you do that. But the other side of that coin that I think we don't talk about enough is that when people aren't meeting what's expected of them, what do you do with those folks? I think 99.9% of people come to work wanting to do the right thing, and they want to do well. And I start that assumption when someone's having a hard time. What is it we can do to help them succeed and meet the standard? But if they can't or won't, then you have them leave the team. And that matters because if you don't do that, then your people that can be high performers will say, why should I bring that extra little bit of effort when other folks aren't doing what I'm doing and they're still getting the same pay, they're still getting the same rewards. But the whole climate of predictability is a foundation to get to a culture of belonging with connected leadership, and all of that together. You could do that with 400 people, you could do it with 4 people, or you can do it with 60,000, but you do it every day, every hour, how you interact with people, and that affects the culture of the whole organization.
I love the way you describe that climate of accountability, sort of this idea of explaining to folks what good looks like so they know what they're aiming for. And then they know when they're held accountable as to whether or not they hit the mark, exceed the mark, they understand where the mark was and exactly what it is that they're being measured against.
Yeah.
The other thing that you mentioned that I think is just super, super important that I think doesn't get emphasized enough is this idea of understanding that as a leader, your individual interactions with them, albeit small, medium, large, all matters. That employee that just came into the organization who by happenstance runs across the CEO in the hallway or gets stuck in an elevator with the CEO. And guess what? If that CEO has nothing to say to that person or is unable to acknowledge and even carry on a conversation, that leaves an impact on that employee. Certainly that was my experience over the years. And I had some leaders who really, really understood that, pulled me aside in very, very interesting moments and maybe just had a natural conversation, asked the question like you indicated, what are you getting out of this? This thing, like, is there something we could be doing better for you? And I just talk a couple of minutes about how you think about those interactions and how important they are, because they absolutely matter at all the various levels of the organization.
And you are absolutely correct. And it does, and it goes back to being authentic, because if you turn it on and turn it off, just by definition, there are going to be moments when it's off. And if those are the moments where you're interacting with a teammate, you are in an elevator with them, or you bump into them someplace outside the workplace, or whatever it happens to be, for you as a leader, that may be just another interaction. For them, that may be the only time they get the opportunity to interact with you as the CEO, as the commander, whatever it happens to be. And that's going to make an impression. And they're going to share that impression with their friends, their teammates, and part of the organization. So I think it starts with leaders just being themselves. And I think it's hard for a young leader when you're 21, 22, 23, you're still trying to be comfortable in your own skin, much less have enough confidence to be yourself with the folks around you. So I think spending time with junior leaders and letting them know that you're the right person for the job. I have confidence in you, have confidence in yourself, and just be yourself. We trust you. That goes a long way so that when they are interacting with peers, leaders, folks that work for them, other teammates, etc., they can be themselves, because I think that goes such a long direction, or such a far, far direction with the organization. But sometimes it's just asking those questions. How was your weekend? How are things going? And you're not going to know every person on a 60,000 person team, but you could ask about things that are happening in the organization. You could ask about sports. You could ask about whatever it happens to be that you may have common interest in. But just being a person goes a long way to both showing loyalty and inspiring loyalty.
Talk to me a little bit about, again, let's stick to this very large expanse of 60,000 people is just a ton. There are even very few, Fortune 500 companies that reach the sort of 50,000 plus level of employees. What kind of exercises or things did you do to make sure you stayed connected at all levels of the organization? Open office hours, occasional meetings with middle management. Like what were you doing to make sure that you connected up and down the org?
It was a combination of things. And the first one really was about the climate of predictability. I started off up front because I found that in an organization that big, when the leader doesn't stay on their calendar, and the leader doesn't have clear expectations of products or briefings or those things, that can have a ripple effect that can be disruptive to the entire organization and have a negative impact on a morale, esprit, etc. So I started being very disciplined in terms of how I managed my time. So folks knew it was expected, when it was expected, meetings starting on time, ending on time. All those sound like just basic things, but when you think about it in an organization where, again, a teammate may get one opportunity in a year to brief the leader, and if you don't give them an opportunity to prepare, an opportunity to set conditions for their success, then they can feel that they're not respected and not cared for. So it starts with that climate of predictability, both in time as well as in products and expectations, those kind of things. The other thing I did was I got out as much as I could traveling. Once a week, I was someplace in the world. Every single week I traveled. Typically, I would travel around the country to one of the 104 Army installations, and I would spend every Tuesday night and Wednesday out there with the team. And I would just visit. We would go from the most senior folks on that part of the team to most junior folks. And a lot of times I would just ask, what do you do? How long have you been doing this? Tell me about it. And just people would be excited to talk about what they do and what they're proud of. And I enjoyed hearing that from them. We would go to the Pacific at least 1 week a year and Europe at least 1 week a year. But again, just being out there and continuing to reinforce to those leaders that people-centric approach, both in modeling it, but also in encouraging them to do it. And then a couple other examples, we're looking for opportunities for informal interaction, things, getting a team together. We would do probably once or twice a year, just get everybody away from the headquarters, which was about 1,200 people, and just spend a day together, a barbecue, those things. I would invite groups of 50 to 55 over to the Army house that I lived in, and we would just have a social together, just an opportunity to talk and just spend time away from work. And then once a month with my subordinate leaders. So I had every one of those 104 installations had a colonel in the language you and I speak, but a leader at that level, 2 levels down, and we would meet online, and we wouldn't talk about work. It wasn't about reporting. It was about leadership. And we would talk about how to be a better leader, how to lead through change. I would talk for 15 minutes, then 45 minutes of just open conversation. And that was me investing in them. But all of that was a holistic approach to getting a large organization that had a very important mission for the Army around the world, but started with taking care of its people.
Do you have any examples of times where you were having just sort of these conversations with folks much deeper in the layered organization, where something was brought to your attention that maybe you weren't aware of, and you were actually able to take that information and translate it into new actionable things at your level?
I think probably one of the best examples. I was traveling February 2025, and I was in Okinawa and in Tokyo and the Republic of Korea and traveling in that part of the world when there were a lot of changes to the policy for our civil service across the country in terms of early retirements and these kind of things. And I was hearing it from a very tactical level because I'm hearing it from these folks and I'm hearing how it affects them and how it concerned them. So the timing of hearing that information was ideal because I was able to go back to the headquarters and then I'm looking across the entire organization saying, we all got this news at the same time. Here is what I'm hearing from out in the force. So we need to tailor our approach to communicating information. We need to make sure we are very sensitive to our employees' needs because these are some hard choices that folks are making and there's uncertainty that we have to help them navigate through. I think if I had just received that information in the headquarters and had been in the headquarters and we thought about how we were going to help the workforce navigate that, I probably would have taken a different approach than when I was out there with the workforce and saw firsthand the anxiety those potential changes were causing there. I think it caused me to be more sensitive and more aware as a leader.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about your personal development as a leader. Like, what kinds of things do you do to ensure either reading, listening to the stories of others? Like, what do you do to make sure that you're not just operating in the vacuum of your own experience and incorporating maybe others' experiences in your own style of leadership?
Yeah. I have found like most military officers, I read a lot, but even as I read and have read, biographies of leaders, from Civil War era, World War II era, et cetera, I actually find that being a student of leaders that I can interact with, whether it is watching leaders of the Army, of the Department of Defense, while I was serving at the highest, when they were at the highest level, watching leaders around me and my peers, I have learned more about leadership from those interactions. And then watching those folks again, a large global organization, but those folks who are at the local level leading, when I would interact with them, I think I probably learned as much from those sergeants majors, from those colonels, by watching how they were leading and they were solving problems and inspiring their team. So I think more than anything, I think my being a student of leadership, my study of leadership has been a combination of experiential and not osmosis, but just learning from those around me more than anything else.
So many of our listeners will be folks in the private sector. And I want to ask a follow-up question eventually about the military style of leadership and why it still seems to resonate across both service and non-service areas. But the questions that I get oftentimes around folks in the private sector has to do around people who feel that they're ready for those leadership opportunities. Maybe they've been in industry 5 to 7 years, maybe even a little longer, maybe even a decade, but still haven't been given the opportunity to actually lead in any kind of substantive way. What advice might you have for someone who feels that they're ready for those opportunities, but haven't quite figured out how to navigate positioning themselves for that first leadership opportunity that opens a door for them?
I think probably three things, MK, and I think the first two are more tightly linked. I think if they aspire to be a leader, continue to study and prepare for that future leadership role, watching the folks around them. I used to keep back in the free internet days, a spiral notebook. When I was a lieutenant in the Army, I would write things down, and it was probably 80% these are things I want to emulate, and there was always 10 to 20% of, I want to stay away from that, and I want to, be a different kind of leader. But studying those leaders around you is the first part. Second one, making sure your leadership knows that you want to be a leader. So in those, whether it's performance reviews or informal conversations, letting folks know there's nothing wrong. It's not that you're being overly ambitious or anything like that, that it's communicating a goal of mine is to be a leader. I enjoy leading teams. I enjoy building teams. I want to lead to be able to give back to this organization. Making sure your own leadership knows that. And then probably that third piece, particularly in the corporate world, is if your own organization is not going to present you those opportunities on a timeline that works for you, you may continue to look for opportunities that are in other organizations that are out there so that you can pursue those goals. You can pursue those opportunities that are important to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice, which leads me to the final question around, as I indicated, we lean into this at Apogee. I think that the military style of leadership, or at least the foundational components, and let me rephrase this, the foundational components of leadership, the discipline of leadership that are taught, studied, amplified, and then subsequently practiced in military environments, I think absolutely translates to civilian environment. And I think that people recognize that over time. In your mind, what are the elements of the leadership style that both you were taught, that you were able to practice, which should be evergreen regardless of where you happen to be, whether that to be private sector, industry, still continuing on in service? What elements of what you've taught that you think resonate across the board, no matter where you happen to be?
I think it starts with humility and recognizing that, every organization needs a leader, but the leader can't lead unless the whole organization is moving forward together. And while you may have an opportunity, a privilege to lead an organization, it takes that entire team. I think it starts there. I think the military does a good job, and far from perfect, but does a good job of reinforcing that. I think the military does a good job of embracing leader development. The other services, probably like the Army, talk about the components of leader development,
Right.
the institutional piece, the self-study that we talked about a little bit, and then what happens at the organizational level. It is probably hard for a corporate organization to do the amount of institutional investments the military does. When I look back on a 33-year career, I spent about 25% in one school or another to continue to have the Army invest in my leader development. That's not uncommon. That's pretty common for officers and senior non-commissioned officers going forward. But that deliberate investment in leadership and the conversations. I mean, when I think about conversations that I would have, even today, even after I've retired, but with peers of mine, both in uniform and out of uniform, more often than not, the conversation would go to leadership. And we talk about leaders that inspired us, leaders that have frustrated us, what have we learned, et cetera. So that culture of learning from each other and that culture of pushing each other in a positive way to be better leaders, and to be more effective leaders, I think is something that helps military leaders in the corporate space, but is also something that corporations can take from the military. One thing I would offer to you that I hear from a lot of corporate leaders, and I heard it from and many military leaders as well, when it comes to people-centric leadership, is folks saying, "I don't have time to do leader development. I'm too busy worrying about profit and loss, or I'm too busy worried
Mhm.
about the mission," whatever it happens to be. And we're all busy. The leaders are busy and the clock never stops. Whether it's pressure from accomplishing a military mission or pressure from meeting the bottom line, that's not going to go away. And you can't pause and say, "I want to spend the next 90 days building my team and investing in my people." So you do have to do both. But my coaching to leaders is that to truly believe and adopt that if you have just 10 minutes, take 8 of those minutes, 9 of those minutes, invest in people, the other 1 or 2 minutes to focus on the mission, you will find out your organization is going to be much more effective and much more successful over the long term because of that 80, 90% of time you put into people going forward. I've had more than a few leaders say, "I don't have time for that. I just want to accomplish what's happening today." What I have found that if you do that, your organization is probably going to be brittle. It will probably not be able to withstand challenges that come in or embrace opportunities that are presented that are out there. But an organization where people are coming to work and they feel like they belong, where they feel like the team cares about them, they're bringing their best selves. When there's a challenge, that organization is going to weather the challenge and be better. When an opportunity comes, that organization is going to embrace the challenge, even before the leader may even know about the movement to embrace that opportunity that's out there and be even more successful going forward. So my response is, how can you not invest in your people as a leader?
Outstanding. For folks that are paying attention to what we're doing across the landscape for Apogee, this is the beginning of our conversation with Lieutenant General, retired United States Army Omar Jones. Omar has thankfully agreed and is a participant and supporter of our advisory board at Apogee. This is the kind of thought leadership that I think is important to help drive the success of our organization and ultimately to be able to have impact on our client base. So Omar, thank you for your time. And again, hopefully this is the first of many conversations that we'll be able to engage in. I hope to get you in studio, as I indicated in the Risk Apogee conversation. And I think that conversation will begin with the question around how not paying attention to leadership actually opens up the organization to potential risk that are difficult to calculate. But you ended your response to the last question around that investment in leadership is not something that you can go without. You've got to make it. You've got to make it. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, MK. Thank you for your leadership of the Apogee team. I'm glad to be on the team, and I look forward to the next conversation. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Folks, thanks for joining us for this episode of Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0, and we'll see you guys on the landscape on the next one. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0. We've talked about the theory and the experiences, but remember, the strongest leaders don't just listen, they act. If you are looking to elevate your executive presence, navigate complex organizational challenges, or build a resilient culture within your own team, you don't have to do it alone. At Apogee Global RMS, our strategy and leader development practice is designed to help you bridge the gap between where you are and where you need to be. Visit us at apogeeglobalrms.io to learn more about our leadership solutions. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn to keep this conversation going. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and stay amplified.